Welcome back, everybody. Max Price is the former Vice-Chancellor and former Principal at the University of Cape Town and has a book out called Statues and Storms that details a transformative era in South African higher education. The book sheds light on the complexities, the challenges and triumphs encountered while reshaping one of South Africa's leading universities. It is a thought-provoking read that invites reflection on the future of education and the power of transformative leadership. The author of Statues and Storms, Max Price, joins us now in studio to tell us more about the book. Mr. Price, a very good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
My pleasure, thank you.
Great stuff. So what inspired you to write Statues and Storms? I mean, what was the thought process behind it?
Firstly, it was to record a history, because the period from 2015 to about 2017 was the period of roads must fall and fees must fall, which were probably undoubtedly the largest protests that had happened on the campuses since 1994, perhaps even before that. And they weren't just at the University of Cape Town, they were across the country.
Yes.
And the universities and the higher education landscape changed quite significantly as a result of that. And so I think many people will write the histories from their perspective, and I thought it was important to give an insider's view of what had happened during that period, what had triggered the protests, what they were about, what the underlying issues were. And then also, because I had now had the experience of being a leader of an institution during that period, I realized that there were a lot of lessons for leadership that I had learned and that I wanted to share with other people, with other leaders of universities, and in fact, leadership more generally.
Well, what are some of the lessons? I suppose it's very prudent that we share with them, so that the other universities or the other leaders of universities, get to know what you've learned about your era, your tenure during this transformative period.
So I suppose there are two kinds of lessons. One were the lessons that related to the issues. For example, the issues of institutional culture. And personally, I went on a journey of discovery through which I came to understand better what were the issues on the liberal white campuses, English-speaking campuses, historically English-speaking and white, that were causing black staff and students to feel so alienated, to feel like they didn't belong there, to feel like they were sort of second-class citizens and visitors. So that was a journey through which was often led through insights from the students about the way that the institution works, and it was everything from the statues itself and the icons that are on the campus, such as the road statue, which we took down, to the artworks on the walls, to the names of buildings, to the way that people respond to accents, to the way that people signal unintentionally familiarity with other people because they come from the same social network or from the same class background, and while other students and other staff feel more distant. So that's one of the journeys. It's about transformation of a culture. The other lessons are around leadership, and we had a crisis, and the debate often was, do you negotiate? Do you listen? Do you spend a lot of time trying to find a solution, often at high cost? Or do you bring in a more coercive elements, private security, police, to control a protest? And it's not a simple solution, because often the negotiation requires closing the campus while you negotiate, which means people are losing time to study. They may lose the opportunity to write exams. Research stops or maybe slowed down while that happens. And that has huge cost for a large number of students and staff, while the protesters might not represent such a large number, but the only other way to control or manage the protest might be through security. So those are some of the strategies.
And the removal of statues and some of the icons at the universities was a very significant event, I suppose, during your era or during your tenure. Let's talk about that. Because so much has been said, and it opened a wide range of debates, as it were, about that particular event. So what kind of impact does it have on the university community?
Yeah, as you say, it's very contested and controversial, and I'd like to think that the debate has opened up or is not a simple debate, and that what happened at the University of Cape Town demonstrated the complexity of it. So just to be a little more specific, the statue of Rhodes, which was taken down at the University of Cape Town, was taken down not because we thought there should be no statues of Rhodes around. There is still a statue of Rhodes at Rhodes Memorial, which is just above the University of Cape Town campus. There's a statue of Rhodes in the gardens outside Parliament. And I don't think those should come down. But it was the particular setting of the statue of Rhodes at the University of Cape Town, which was at the focal point of the university and which signaled to people in the university that somehow the university venerated those values. So it was actually saying more about the university than it was saying about Cecil John Rhodes. And it was for that reason that it needed to be moved off the campus.
So you think it had nothing to do with race?
Well, it had to do with race, it had to do with colonialism, it had to do with the fact that Rhodes represented the exploitation of workers in the mines. And it started a movement which, it started a movement which has now spread all over the world. And in campuses in the States, in the UK, slave owners who previously were venerated by statues on many of those campuses, or people who represented the southern states, the Confederacy, slaveholders, their statues are now coming down all over the world because people are rethinking what it says about the institutions. It's really important not to erase history, and it's important not to airbrush history and pretend that it didn't exist. Those figures are part of all of our history. They shaped us in one way or another.
Sure.
So we don't want to remove them. They must become vehicles for education as well. But we must be very careful about when they become statues, what they're saying about the institution. And the same with the naming of buildings, for example.
And another issue that was particularly contentious is the issue of curriculum transformation. It remains a hot topic and a subject for debate even today. So how did you approach this very important element of educational change while you're still at UCT?
Also, an interesting challenge, particularly in a university which values academic freedom. And one of the tenets of academic freedom is that lecturers should be free to teach what they want and shouldn't be told what to teach. People should be free to research what they want. And so it's not really possible for a leader of an institution like a vice-chancellor to give instructions, or even a dean to give instructions and say, you will teach this or you will change your curriculum that way. It has to be a bottom-up process. And so the answer to the question how was through creating fora and discussions and creating the space for that discussion. And that was very hard to do because some people are very aggressive about curriculum change and create an environment where, particularly around identity politics, where they say, if you haven't been black or if you haven't been disabled or if you're not gay, you can't understand my experience and you can't teach me anything about it. I reject that, but just to say that I reject that. But it's part of the dynamic of that debate.
Got you.
And so that can have a silencing effect instead of having the debate happen. But in each of the faculties, there were meetings that went for 2 or 3 years and they continue. And there will be a continuation of that curriculum reform. I think that it's different in different faculties as well. So if you're in a health science faculty, for example, all the patients you treat are coming from the local population, the local hospitals, and there is a natural, the curriculum evolves to deal with the needs of local people. Same for law, same for many of the other faculties. There are other faculties in which it's much more of a challenge because we've tended to adopt historically curricula that are universal curricula, global curricula, and often they've come from the global north, and they need to be challenged by making sure that they represent the global south, the authors and researchers of the east and the west together.
Now, in your book, you also mentioned clashes between the university, the different faculties, and the students. So, how did you navigate through these conflicts? And do you think that how a particular conflict is resolved has anything to do with a leader or a vice-chancellor's leadership?
One of the really interesting things, and it's one of the leadership lessons of the negotiations, was that the student movement was not a structured movement. There was no organization called Rhodes Must Fall or Fees Must Fall. There was no leadership. There were no formal spokespeople. There was no constitution. And so we had to deal with a constantly changing, very flat structure. We would negotiate, for example, with maybe a group of 10 representatives. They would go back to a plenary session in the evening, and the plenary would say, we disagree with what you've just negotiated. We're going to send a different 10 people the next day. And so you have this, and there was also a lack of trust.
Yeah.
So we had to evolve a system which firstly was tolerant of that leaderless structure in a way and allowed for that. But we also, we at the request of the students, we allowed the negotiations to be live streamed. So students had their cameras in the negotiation forum. They were live streaming it to the plenary and to anyone who wanted to watch, so that their supporters could see that if they agreed to something, they weren't being co-opted. They could see that there was some give and take on both sides. So this was not something we'd ever done before, and it's very rarely done, but the world of social media has changed how we manage conflict, how we manage protest, and how we manage negotiation.
As you just said, that movements such as these, there is absolutely no structure. But then the universities, the different universities, that is, entertained those particular movements. Do you think that it'll sort of start a domino effect, that other movements just spring up and the universities entertain them while there's no structure in place?
Well, I think it will, but those structures, those movements are fatally flawed, and the evidence is that they all die. They die very quickly, and they're not actually very strong. Mm-hmm. They don't have a durability. And if we think about the Occupy movements, like Occupy Wall Street around the world, these were similarly very flat movements without leaders, but they fragment because they don't have a way of deciding who's in and out. They're very easily infiltrated.
They may fragment, but it leaves a huge impact on the different institutions.
That's right, yeah. No, it does. And we've got to adapt to different ways. The point is that if a movement is powerful, if it's got the power to mobilize 2,000 people out of, let's say, a campus of 25,000, but if it can mobilize 2,000 people to put up barricades, to sit in a classroom and then to get up and start toy-toying on the desks, then it is powerful enough to bring to a halt the normal functioning of the institution, and you have to have a way to respond to that. It seemed to me that the first way to respond is with negotiation, even though it's moving, even though it's fluctuant, even though the goalposts keep moving. And what I hope to show in the book is that actually can be successful. Mm-hmm. We did bring the ship of UCT through the storms back into a safe harbor in the end through a whole lot of those strategies.
Right. Mr. Price, lovely chatting to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Sipiwe.
Great stuff. Well, that was the former Vice-Chancellor and Principal of the University of Cape Town talking to us about his book, Statues and Storms.